Welcome to the Ultrahuman experience. This session is free for you for the complete experience. Please download the Ultrahuman app.
My name is Elizabeth Saydah, and tonight we will take a journey into the English countryside, to a sweet-smelling, hidden garden that is brought back to life by 3 little children. Before we go on this journey, let's just take a moment to get comfortable. Tuck yourself into your warm and cozy blanket. Get into a comfortable position. Rest your head comfortably on your pillow. The room feels cool and inviting. This is your happy place. Gently close your eyes and focus on your natural breathing pattern. Observe how the air flows in and out effortlessly. Now, take a deep breath in. Mentally count up to 4 and then slowly breathe out to the count of 4. Let's try that again. Take a deep breath in, counting up to 4. Feel the air fill up your lungs, and then slowly breathe out as you count to 4. Your body feels nice and relaxed now. Imagine an expanse of purple grassland. Yes, purple, not green. Something like a meadow of lavender, dotted with white and yellow flowers. The fragrance of flowers carried to you by a gentle wind that brushes your body and calms you. Feel your bare feet and toes step on the cool, soft grass, and eyes closed, your face lifts to feel the wind blow through your hair. The sky is a pale English grey, and you are stepping into the great moors of Yorkshire. A wind was rising, making a low, rushing sound. It rose over the great moor of Yorkshire, a vast climbing stretch of land, an endless purple sea of heather. It whistled through dry bushes and leafless shrubs that slept quietly through the winter. The wind swept across the stone courtyard of an immensely long, low-built manor. It gently brushed against a little, frail girl, making the hair on the nape of her neck stand up. She was tired, having traveled a long way, and she shivered as she gazed up at the huge door before her, made of massive panels of oak, studded with iron nails, and bound by great iron bars. Little Miss Mary Lennox had arrived at Misselthwaite Manor. She had lost her parents to cholera in India. Soldiers had found her and taken her to a poor English clergyman's house at first. The clergyman and his family had tried to be kind to her, but she had sulked and thrown tantrums. So instead, Mary had been sent on a long voyage to England to live with her Uncle Archibald. Mary had travelled on the ship to England under the care of an officer's wife, who was very much absorbed in her own little boy and girl, and was only too glad when the voyage was over, and she could hand Mary over to the care of Mrs. Medlock. Mrs. Medlock was Uncle Archibald Craven's housekeeper at Misselthwaite Manor, where, as his ward, Mary was to take up permanent residence. Mary's bedroom was large. The walls were covered with a rich tapestry, embroidered with a forest scene. A majestic woman, dark-haired and doe-eyed, sat on a pure white horse. She was dressed in a scarlet and gold gown, with a crown of gold upon her head. The woman was surrounded by courtiers, huntsmen, soldiers, ladies, drummers, and dogs. Her attendants were dressed in rich blue and gold clothes. And in the background, Mary could see tall trees with brown trunks and dark green leaves. Sunlight trickled in through the canopy of leaves, lighting up the woman on the horse. In the distance, Mary could glimpse of the towers of a castle. She felt as if she too were in the forest. She had to tear herself away from the tapestry. The rest of her room was simple. A comfortable, fluffy-looking stout bed sat in the middle of the room. An old, weathered dressing table with an oval mirror was placed opposite the bed. The windows were tall, wide, and arched, and through the windows, Mary could see the purplish, wind-swept moor. Martha, Mary's maid at Misselthwaite, was a young, bright-eyed girl who chattered constantly. She was unlike any servant Mary had met before. Martha came from a family of 12 children. Her father earned 16 shillings a week, and the family lived in a single-room cottage down in the village. She had lived with boisterous, friendly, and well-loved siblings all her life, and did not know what to make of lonely and disagreeable little Mary, who sniffed at her porridge and nibbled at her toast, while Martha's own siblings would have devoured several helpings of the same in seconds. Martha told Mary stories of her siblings' antics, especially that of her brother Dickon, who seemed to work magic with animals and all things alive. Martha also told Mary about the secret garden, which had been kept under lock and key for a decade, ever since the mistress of the manor, Mrs. Craven, had died. It was rumoured that the master, Mr. Craven, had thrown the key away, for Mrs. Craven had loved the garden and had tended to it for years, and the garden reminded him so much of her that he couldn't stand to be in it. One afternoon, having had enough of sitting around inside the vast echoing halls of the manor, Mary decided to explore the grounds of the manor. She walked out into the stone courtyard and looked around. She saw a gate that was built into the clipped garden hedge on one end of the courtyard. The gate opened into a large open lawn with winding stone paths, flower beds, and hedges that were cut into the shapes of animals and people. Mary could not help but think of the secret garden, which no one had been in for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like. Would there be any flowers in it after so many years? Mary continued to explore the ground and came across an old grey fountain and stone benches set in the middle of the lawn. She sat on one of the benches, swinging her legs. The grass of this lawn had turned yellow and pale. It crackled beneath her feet. The fountain was dry and dusty, littered with twigs and leaves, and the flower beds were bare and brown. This was surely not the garden which had been locked up. How could a garden be locked up? Mary thought to herself. Gardens don't have walls or a roof. They are open to the sky, the wind, and the sun. Curious to find out more, she got up from the bench and walked down the winding stone pathway of the lawn and arrived at another gate. This gate opened into an orchard with bare-limbed trees creaking in symphony with the wuthering wind of the moor. She walked amidst the trees and arrived at a wall so thickly covered in ivy that she had mistaken it to be a tall hedge at first. She could see the tops of trees above the wall, and when she stood still, she saw a bird with a bright red breast, a robin, sitting on the topmost branch of one of them. I believe that tree is in the secret garden. I feel sure it is, she said. There is a wall around the place, and there is no door, she thought. The robin flew down from his perch and settled on a lump of earth near her foot. The bird put his tiny head on one side and looked up at her. He seemed quite familiar and not the least afraid. He hopped about and pecked the earth briskly, looking for seeds and insects. It actually gave Mary a queer feeling in her heart, because he was so pretty and cheerful. It felt like there was an actual person with her. He had a tiny plump body, a delicate beak, and slender legs. Mary looked at him, pecking the earth around her, and saw something half buried in the soil. It looked like a ring of rusted iron or brass. When the robin flew up into a tree nearby, she bent down and brushed the soil from the rusted ring and picked it up. It was more than a ring. It was an old key, which looked as if it had been buried a long time ago. Little Miss Mary stood up and looked at it in awe as it hung from her finger. Perhaps it has been buried for 10 years, she said in a whisper. Perhaps it is the key to the secret garden. Mary might have found the key, but she had not yet found the hidden garden itself. Living in a house with 100 mysteriously closed rooms and servants who were too busy to play with her, she had nothing whatsoever to do. The idea of a secret garden was now awakening her imagination. In India, she had always been too hot and languid and weak to care much about anything. But in this place, she was beginning to care and was always wanting to do new things. One day, after having run around and skipped through the gardens, Mary ended up at the ivy-covered wall. The robin she had made friends with had settled itself on a tree beyond the wall. The ivy was dense and unyielding. She could see nothing but thickly growing, glossy, dark green leaves. The robin flew from his perch on the tree to a swinging spray of ivy, on to the top of the wall, and he opened his beak and sang a soft, lovely trill. The call of the robin was like a magic spell. At once, a gust of wind rushed down the orchard. It was the strong Wuthering wind, strong enough to wave the branches of the trees in the orchard. It made the trailing sprays of untrimmed ivy hanging from the wall sway from one side to another. Mary watched mesmerized as the wind swung aside some loose trails of ivy, and she caught a glimpse of something hidden underneath all the thick leaves. She stepped towards the wall and brushed aside some of the trails of ivy, and there it was, a round knob which had been covered by the leaves hanging over it. It was the knob of a door. She put her hands under the leaves and began to push them aside. Thick as the ivy seemed to be, it was all nearly a loose and swinging curtain. Though some had crept over the wood and iron of the door, Mary's heart began to thump, and her hands shook a little in her delight and excitement. The robin kept singing and twittering away, as if he were as excited as she was. As she swung more ivy to the side, she revealed a stout door set into the wall, with a rusted iron knob and a keyhole under it. It was made of the same material as the key she had found the other day. Mary had taken to carrying that key in her pocket every day since the day she had found it, as she always hoped to find the secret garden. Could it be that she had finally found it? She put her hand into her pocket, drew out the key, and found that it fitted the keyhole. She put the key in and turned it. It took 2 hands to do it, but it did turn, and she took another breath and pushed at the door, which swung open slowly. Then she slipped through it and shut it behind her, and stood with her back against it, looking about her with wonder. Mary was standing inside the secret garden. It was the sweetest, most mysterious-looking place. The high walls which shut it in were covered with leafless stems of climbing roses, which were so thick that they were matted together. Mary Lennox knew they were roses because she had seen a great many roses in India. The ground was covered with patches of yellow and brown grass. Clumps of bushes and flower beds were scattered across the garden. More rose shrubs had been planted in between flower beds. Many shrubs had spread their branches widely after being left untamed for many years. Beech, ash, blackthorn, and elm trees grew majestically from the soil, and their branches swayed hypnotically in the wind. The thick, woody stems of climbing rose plants had wound themselves all over the trees, and when they ran out of support, hung down in long tendrils, forming swaying curtains all over the garden. These roses had crept from tree branch to tree branch, forming lovely bridges of themselves. There were neither leaves nor roses on them now, and Mary did not know whether they were dead or alive. But their thin grey-brown branches, tangled here and scattered there, looked like a hazy mantle spreading over everything. The walls, the trees, and even on the yellow grass, where they had fallen and run along the ground. It was this hazy tangle from tree to tree which made it all look so mysterious. Mary had thought it must be so different, as it had been left unattended for so long. It was different from any other place she had ever seen in her life. She listened to the stillness. The robin, who had flown to his perch on the treetop, was still as all the rest. He did not even flutter his wings. He sat without stirring and looked at Mary. "No wonder it is so still here," she whispered. "I am the first person who has spoken in here for 10 years. She moved away from the door, stepping as softly as if she were afraid of awakening someone. She was glad that there was grass under her feet and that her steps made no sounds. She walked under one of the fairy-like grey arches between the trees and looked up at the dry vines which formed them. "I wonder if they are all quite dead," she said. "Is it all a quite dead garden? I wish it wasn't." It was then that little Miss Mary made up her mind to bring the garden to life. She dug the dry soil and pulled the weeds out of the flower beds and enjoyed herself so immensely that she did not notice time fly by. The exercise made her so warm that she first removed her coat and then her hat, and without knowing it, she was smiling down at the grass and the pale green points that she found hiding amongst all the weeds and the grass. Mistress Mary worked in the garden till it was time for her midday dinner. In fact, she was rather late in remembering. And when she did, she could not believe that she had been working for 2 or 3 hours. Dozens of tiny, pale green points were seen in cleared places, looking twice as cheerful as they had looked before, when the grass and weeds had been smothering them. "I shall come back," she said, looking all round her at her new kingdom, and speaking to the trees and the rose bushes as if they heard her. Then she ran lightly across the grass, pushed open the old door, and slipped out. She had such red cheeks and such bright eyes, and ate such a dinner that Martha was delighted. Martha, who had seen her fuss over her food most of the time, stared open-mouthed as Mary polished off 2 pieces of meat and 2 helpings of rice pudding. "Martha," she said, "what are those white roots that look like onions?" "They're bulbs," answered Martha. "Lots of spring flowers grow from them. The little bulbs grow into white snowdrops and purple crocus, and the big ones into yellow narcissus and daffodils. The biggest bulbs become white lilies and purple flags. Dickon's got a whole lot of them planted in our bit of garden at home." "Does Dickon know all about them?" asked Mary, a new idea taking possession of her. "Our Dickon can make a flower grow out of a brick wall. Mother says he just whispers things out of the ground." "I want to learn those things as well. Could you ask him to come here?" asked Mary. "Why not? It will do him good to have some other company as well. I'll tell him when I'm home next," said Martha. One afternoon, after a morning of having worked in the secret garden, Mary went to take a nap between the trees in the woods behind the manor. She was looking for a comfortable spot when she heard a low, peculiar whistling sound. She followed the sound to its source and was met by a strange sight. A boy was sitting under a tree with his back against it, playing on a rough wooden pipe. He was a funny-looking boy, about 12. He looked very clean. His nose was turned up, and his cheeks were red as poppies. Never had Mistress Mary seen such round and such blue eyes in any boy's face. On the trunk of the tree he was leaning on, a brown squirrel was clinging and watching him, and from behind a bush nearby, a cock pheasant was delicately stretching his neck to peep out. At his feet were 2 rabbits sitting up and sniffing with tremulous noses. It appeared as if they were all drawing near to watch him and listen to the strange low little call his pipe seemed to make. When he saw Mary, he held up his hand and spoke to her in a voice as low as his piping. "Don't move," he said. "You will frighten them." Mary remained motionless. He stopped playing his pipe and began to rise from the ground. He moved so slowly that it scarcely seemed as though he were moving at all. But at last he stood on his feet, and then the squirrel scampered back up into the branches of his tree. The pheasant withdrew his head, and the rabbits dropped on all fours and began to hop away, though not at all as if they were frightened. "I'm Dickon," the boy said. "You must be Miss Mary." "Dickon," thought Mary. "Of course he's Dickon. Who else could have been charming rabbits and pheasants like that?" He had a wide, red, curving mouth, and his smile spread all over his face. He did not speak to her as if they had never seen each other before, but as if he knew her quite well. Mary knew nothing about boys, and she spoke to him a little stiffly because she felt rather shy. "Did Martha tell you?" she asked. He nodded his curly, rust-colored head. "That's why I came. I've got garden tools. There's a little spade, a rake, a fork, and a hoe. There's a trowel, too. The woman in the shop threw in a packet of white poppy and blue larkspur when I bought the other seeds. See here, I'll plant them for you myself. Where is that garden?" Mary did not know what to say, so for a long minute she said nothing. She had never thought of this. She felt miserable, and she felt as if she went red and then pale. "Could you keep a secret if I told you one? It's a great secret. I don't know what I should do if anyone found it out," she said. Dickon simply looked at her. "I keep secrets all the time," he said. "If I couldn't keep secrets about foxes' cubs and birds' nests and wild things' holes, nothing would be safe from the other boys and hunters on the moor. I can keep your secret too." And so it was that Miss Mary told Dickon about the secret of her having found the secret garden. From that day, they began to groom the secret garden together. One rainy evening, Mary sat on her bed reading a book. The door to her room was ajar and creaking. The wind was wuthering, and a new sound came down the corridor, a far-off faint sound of crying. She felt as if she must find out what it was. There was a candle by her bedside, and she took it up and walked softly out of the room. She followed the crying sound down the corridor, into a part of the manor she had not explored before. A tall, closed door lay in front of her. She could see a glimmer of light coming from beneath it. Someone was crying in that room, and it was quite a young someone. So she walked to the door and pushed it open. It was a big room with ancient, handsome furniture in it. There was a low fire glowing faintly at the hearth, and a night light burning by the side of a carved 4-post bed that was hung with brocade. And on the bed was a boy, crying softly. Mary wondered if she was in a real place, or had she fallen asleep and was dreaming without knowing it. The boy had a sharp, delicate face, the color of ivory. His liquid eyes seemed too big for his face. His hair tumbled over his forehead in heavy locks and made his thin face seem smaller. Mary stood near the door with her candle in her hand, holding her breath. She had unknowingly stumbled across Colin Craven, the little master of Misselthwaite Manor. Colin's mother had passed away at childbirth, and he had always been a frail and sickly child. He had been pampered by his nurse and maids, and his father hardly ever came to visit him. The doctor had told Colin that going outdoors would be good for him, but he felt uncomfortable outside, and he had no one to play with. So he remained in bed all day long and looked at pictures in books. He never got good sleep and cried because he was lonely. "No, you are not," said Mary. "I am here now. I want to hear about you." "Who are you?" said Colin. Mary put down her candle on the table near the bed and sat down on a cushioned stool. She told all about herself while he lay back on his pillow and listened. Days passed by, and Colin became part of Mary's routine at the manor. She began to sneak into Colin's room more and more often, with stories of the secret garden and Dickon. She read to him from books and made him laugh. When the servants discovered that Mary had been meeting Colin, they were appalled. But Colin's nurse began to notice that he was looking more cheerful and cried less and lesser as the days passed by. "Children need other children to be with," she told the other staff. And after that, Mary was allowed to visit Colin whenever she pleased. Mary's stories of the house, the staff, the garden, and Dickon slowly began to make Colin curious about the world beyond his room. He asked to be taken to dine with her. He explored the huge manor on another day, and every time Mary ran out to play with Dickon, he too began to yearn to be outdoors. Colin asked his nurse to take him outdoors one day. The nurse was more than glad to do so, as the doctor had advised that fresh air and a bit of sun would do Colin good. Every day, a blanket would be spread on the lawns, and the 3 children sat there and played with each other and the birds and the bees. Soon, Colin was well enough to run around the lawns and skip and jump with Mary and Dickon. One day, Mary decided that it was time to let Colin in on the secret of the secret garden. Together, the 3 children dug the earth weeded the flower beds, planted bulbs, tended to the dried rose bushes, and spoke to the inhabitants of the garden as if they were the subjects of a secret kingdom in which they ruled. Dreary winter winds soon gave way to the warm gusts of spring on the moor. The heather began to flower and smell sweet. The secret garden had become a place of magic and wonder. Bright yellow daffodils and pristine white poppy dotted the freshly turned earth. The scent of fresh green grass mingled with the smell of honey from blue sprigs of larkspur, white snowdrops, purple crocus, yellow narcissus, and daffodils that littered the flower beds. Bees buzzed busily amongst them all. The robin sat on his perch and sang his heart out. Butterflies flitted from flower to flower, and the roses were in full bloom. Red roses, pink roses, white roses, and yellow roses, button roses, and pretty buds, full blossoms and shy ones blanketed the tree trunks, walls, and the canopy of the secret garden. 3 happy children ran through the garden on strong little feet, their laughter mingling with the songs of birds and the buzzing of insects. Their cheeks were rosy from exercise, their limbs strong from eating and digging. Big breaths of rough, fresh air blew over the flowering heather of the moor, filling their lungs and brightening their eyes. The secret garden had slowly come to life under their diligent and tender care. And with it, the children had blossomed as well. Spring had, at last, settled into Misselthwaite Manor.